Happy Thanksgiving. Hooray, hooray, hooray. Aren't you glad you're not a turkey on this Thanksgiving Day? Words, the late great Debbie Friedman. This will be the last of the Origins of Our Holidays series this year. And of course, Thanksgiving be a controversial one. First, go to kettleandfire.com. Take a look around. See what strikes your fancy. A lot of delicious stuff for the fall as we head into winter. Soup, broth, little bit of whatever you want. All for you, and they want to give you, the listeners of this podcast, 10% off. Code BetterHumanhood at checkout. It's kettleandfire.com, kettleandfire.com. Code BetterHumanhood at checkout. 10% off. Let's do the show.
Welcome to Better Humanhood, where we build a better world by building better people. We have to live on the planet, and we have to live with other people. We have conversations about making that a wonderful proposition.
Every year, my Auntie Lindy would make a pumpkin pecan pie with pecans in concentric circles, covering the entire top of the pie, and every year, someone would grab the center pecan, and it would always be somebody different. Every year, my aunt pretended to be angry when the pie made its way to the table. See, my parents' home in Springfield, Massachusetts was a gathering place for my family for years, and by my family, I mean it. My siblings and me, aunts, uncles, cousins, occasionally girlfriends and boyfriends, and later spouses, grandparents, sometimes a stray college buddy with no other plans over the break. We opened up the dining room table, added an extra folding table or two if necessary, and dug up every chair in the house, including the dusty chairs inherited from past generations that folded in various directions we had to rediscover. Some years, there were 25 people around my parents' table. There were, of course, memories made. The year of the really bad Jell-O mold, the year my little cousin ate an onion like an apple for $5, the one time we ate so early we had to get some pizza later, the time the chocolate-covered strawberries never made it to the dessert table, and by the time my aunt was on her way home and called to let us know we'd already demolished them while watching the Three Stooges. Occasionally, a friend would drop by late after everyone was gone and the family was basically passed out watching television. That would be, 8 p.m., of course. Now our family's spread out some. We've lost a generation in some parts of the family and gained a generation in others. My parents host more like 8 or 10 people. There are 2, sometimes 3 branches of the family that get together at different locations, rather than all gathering in one spot. Those are my family's Thanksgiving traditions, and I'm sure if you're in the U.S. or Canada, your family has some too. Whether it's a family meal or volunteering at a shelter, or maybe it's a protest. How did we get here? What's the origins of us making hand turkeys and playing Pilgrims and Indians in elementary school? Am I even allowed to talk about that in today's world? Most of what we know about the first Thanksgiving celebrations comes from Of Plymouth Plantation, a diary by William Bradford, who was governor on and off of what was then Plymouth Colony for about 30 years between 1621 and 1657. According to Country Living, Bradford noted in his manuscript that the Pilgrims of Plymouth had enjoyed an especially good harvest in the fall of 1621. In honor of their good fortune, they planned a meal to celebrate and give thanks for the abundance of food. The local Wampanoag natives had worked along with the Pilgrims to hunt, fish, and gather much of the food, and they'd even taught the Pilgrims about many of the tactics in the first place. For that reason, they joined in to give thanks for it all, and yes, there was a cooked fowl dish, but no mention of pie. Prayers of thanks and special Thanksgiving ceremonies are common among all religions after harvest and at other times, notes Wikipedia. The Thanksgiving holiday's history in North America is rooted in English traditions dating from the Protestant Reformation. It also has aspects of a harvest festival. The Reformation, by the way, was a time in the 16th century when England broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. The first Thanksgiving wasn't actually a Thanksgiving, though. National Geographic points out the early pilgrims who landed at Plymouth celebrated Thanksgiving with a fast, not a feast. Really, it was a harvest celebration and a commemoration of a peace treaty that early English settlers in the Wampanoag signed about 7 months earlier. A treaty, by the way, that lasted 50 years. But National Geographic goes on to say, a year before the first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims raided Native American graves. When the Pilgrims arrived in Cape Cod, they were incredibly unprepared. They were under the persistent belief that because New England is south of the Netherlands and southern England, it would therefore be warmer. Then they showed up 6 weeks before winter with practically no food. In a desperate state, the Pilgrims robbed corn from Native American graves and storehouses soon after they arrived, but because of their overall lack of preparation, half of them still died within their first year. The Pilgrims could only settle at Plymouth because thousands of Native Americans, including many of those Wampanoag they signed the peace treaty with, had been killed by disease. The peace that led to that first Thanksgiving was driven by trade and tribal rivalries. Before the Wampanoag suffered losses from disease, they had driven Europeans like John Smith away. Now, says a Pilgrim settler named Mann, the Wampanoag were much weaker because of the disease, and they were much weaker than their hated adversaries, the Narragansett. Aaron McMullen, curator of the National Museum of the American Indians, says that the Wampanoag weren't necessarily looking to make alliances against the Narragansett, but because the Wampanoag were in a slightly weakened position, they realized that an alliance with the Pilgrims could fortify their strength. There are always two sides of a story, say the writers at Native Hope. Unfortunately, when it comes to the history of Thanksgiving, generations of Americans have been taught a one-sided history in homes and schools. Well, they do say that history is written by the winners, huh? Well, the peace treaty with the Wampanoag may have been enforced after the first harvest dinner. The settlers went on to keep slaughtering other tribes, including the local Pequot. Thanksgiving is, in fact, a day of mourning for some native tribes. Quoting now from the website Native Hope. It's important to note that for many Native Americans, Thanksgiving is a day of mourning and protest, since it commemorates the arrival of settlers in North America and the centuries of oppression and genocide that followed after. For the last 48 years, the United American Indians of New England, and I'm not sure what year this is written, so I'm sure it's more than 48 years at this point, have organized a rally and day of mourning on November 22nd. Here's what they have to say about this choice to mourn on Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day is a reminder of the genocide of millions of Native people, the theft of native lands, and the relentless assault on Native culture. Participants in a National Day of Mourning honor Native ancestors and the struggles of Native peoples to survive today. It is a day of remembrance and spiritual connection, as well as a protest of the racism and oppression which Native Americans continue to experience. Other Native Americans still get together with friends and family. They go on to write, since the concept of Thanksgiving, that is, giving without the expectation of reciprocity, is a Native tradition. Susan Bates expounds a bit on the slaughter. The story began in 1614, when a band of English explorers sailed home to England with a ship full of Patuxet Indians bound for slavery. They left behind smallpox, which virtually wiped out those who had escaped. By the time the Pilgrims arrived in Massachusetts Bay, they found only one living Patuxet Indian, a man named Squanto who had survived slavery in England and knew their language. He taught them to grow corn and to fish, and negotiated a peace treaty between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag Nation. At the end of the first year, the Pilgrims held a great feast honoring Squanto and the Wampanoags. But as word spread in England about the paradise to be found in the New World, religious zealots called Puritans began arriving by the boatload. Finding no fences around the land, they considered it to be in the public domain. Joined by other British settlers, they seized the land, capturing strong young natives for slaves and killing the rest. But the Pequot Nation had not agreed to the peace treaty Squanto had negotiated, and they fought back. The Pequot War was one of the bloodiest Indian wars ever fought. In 1637, near present-day Groton, Connecticut, over 700 men, women, and children of the Pequot tribe had gathered for the annual Green Corn Festival, which is a native Thanksgiving celebration. The pre-dawn hours, the sleeping Indians were surrounded by English and Dutch mercenaries who ordered them to come outside. Those who came out were shot or clubbed to death, while the terrified women and children who huddled inside the longhouse were burned alive. The next day, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony declared a day of Thanksgiving because 700 unarmed men, women, and children had been murdered. Here's the thing. As I noted before, history is written by the winners, and it always has been. While I do believe it's important to acknowledge the truth in history, the fact is that the history of humans is filled with people killing people who looked, sounded, or behaved differently from them, and then inflicting their beliefs on the defeated group. Let's do this maybe. Let's remember that there seriously is plenty for everyone and learn to live with our differences moving forward. Let's acknowledge that history is full of some people being really shitty to other people for stupid reasons. But let's allow our good traditions, like gathering with friends and family, eating, being grateful, volunteering in shelters, whatever it is we do, to shine through. Have a great day today. Be grateful for what you have, for what you could be who you will to be. BetterHumanhood.com for show notes for this and other episodes. If you want 10% off your bone broth and soups, order to KillOnFire.com. Use code BetterHumanhood at checkout. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Get show notes and more at BetterHumanhood.com. Leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And have yourself a wonderful day.